Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Watch or listen to this show at KGRA DB or on KGRA's YouTube channel. If you subscribe to KGRA and you use my name, Peter, you will get a 30% discount on your membership. And no special monologue tonight. It is a cold night in central New York State with temperatures about to drop down to the neighborhood of 0. So to all my friends in the South and the Southwest, I wish I was there instead of here, but still good to be here. Tonight's guest, ABCnews.com has called Marc Hartzman one of America's leading connoisseurs of the bizarre. And George Norrie from Coast to Coast said he's as bizarre as Robert Ripley. Hartzman considers both high compliments, since his passion for the unusual started with Ripley's Believe It or Not and the annual Guinness Book of World Records, both during his youth. In addition to his books about ghosts, Mars, Oliver Cromwell's Embalmed Head, Weird Things on eBay, sideshow performers, and unorthodox messages from God, Hartzman has written for Mental Floss, The Huffington Post, AOL Weird News, AllThat'sInteresting.com, The Morbid Anatomy, Online Journal, and Bizarre Magazine. Great magazine, by the way, if you're into the bizarre. He's discussed oddities on CNN, MSNBC, Ripley's Radio, and the Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum. More of his love for the unusual can be found on his website, weirdhistorian.com. Outside of these projects, Hartzman earns a living as an award-winning advertising and creative director, and he is currently at work on a book about UFOs. Marc Hartzman, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be here.
And how is the weather in New Rochelle tonight?
It's cold. It's cold here, too. Maybe not quite as cold as it is by you, but yeah, feeling like winter.
So before we went on, I was talking to you about, in childhood, the Daily News, big New York newspaper, I think it was weekly, but they syndicated the cartoons from Ripley. And we'll talk about him a bit as we go forward. But that love of the bizarre, the unusual, the weird, I think it's something endemic in most human beings, at least a lot of us. And it does dovetail in a way into paranormal and UFO studies. But let's begin at the beginning with you. Where were you born?
I was born in Denver, Colorado.
Well, all right. And
another cold place at times.
You're one of siblings or only child?
No, I have an older sister.
And is she into the bizarre as well?
No.
Often works that way with siblings.
Yeah.
Your folks, what did or what does your dad do for a living?
My dad was a field service engineer for GE. So he installed equipment and repaired equipment at hospitals for years. He also, as a side gig, would fix TVs in our basement. So we used to have people come over with their big, cathode ray TV sets, and they bring them down to our basement, and he'd fix them. And I I probably should have paid more attention. Although learning how to fix those would be, doesn't do much good now anyway. But
I was
I
going to
didn't,
say,
I didn't pick up too many of those skills. But he used to not like it when we watched TV. Like my sister and I would want to watch shows, and he would not like us watching TV, and he would, get angry if we watched too much TV, and he'd say, I'm gonna break the TV so you can't watch any more TV. I never understood, like, but you fix people's TVs. If you hate TV so much, why do you fix TVs for people? So I probably didn't get the whole.
It pays the bills, son.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that.
You remind me, though, the nostalgia of people who fix things. Every town used to have a place with a guy, usually, who fixed appliances, as opposed to our modern world, where when an appliance stopped working or a piece of technology, you throw it away, which is terrible. And I mean, just a whole nother ethic and reality. Did your mom work as well, or does she?
Yeah, she owned the monogramming business. So I grew up with her having that business, and she had, monograms coming in from different companies, and, individuals would just come in, get towels or whatever they might want monograms. So, yeah. So, different than what I do, both of them. But yeah, I mean, I do sometimes wish I picked up more mechanical skills to fix things, along the way. It's funny, just a quick story along that. I have a stand-up Miss Pac-Man machine from 1981 downstairs. And it stopped working one day, just kind of came with a bunch of like gibberish instead of the regular game. And I thought, like, oh no, like I don't want this thing to be broken. I start like looking up, like, can I find someone that can fix these things? And I couldn't, so I called my dad and used FaceTime because he's in Denver. And I took the back off and I held the phone up to it and showed him the circuitry and everything. And he's like, oh, it's humid out where you are. He's like, you see all those like little black boxes or something like that. He's like, just push on all those because maybe the connection just got a little bit loose on one of them. If you just push on all those, you should find it. We'll see if that works. And I did, and it worked. I'm like, wow, you fixed it through FaceTime. This is great. I would have had no idea.
It's sort of like in the old analog days, if your car radio was buzzing or not coming in clearly, the standard way to deal with it was pound on your dashboard several times.
Right. Shake something looser. Yeah.
When you were a kid growing up, about what age were you when you mastered reading well enough to start to read whatever you wanted to, as opposed to kids' books?
Oh man, I don't even remember. I don't remember, like 7, 8, I guess. I don't know, 9.
Good. And what kind of books did you gravitate toward at first?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Guinness books, so I certainly read those. But I used to like, there were these horror novels for,
Cool.
Young readers at that time. I can't remember what the series was called. I actually wish I could remember because it'd be fun to look those up again. But I used to love those. A little bit younger, I remember loving Encyclopedia Brown. I thought those were really fun. So read all sorts of stuff.
My intuition says your favorite holiday is Halloween.
I love Halloween. Definitely.
Me too. Your taste as a kid in the world of film.
So my favorite movie is a movie I saw when I was about, I guess, 7, which was Time Bandits, Terry Gilliam movie. And I saw it in the theater, and I just loved it ever since. And I've shown it to my kids, and they love it. And it's one of those movies that every time I watch it, I'll pick up like another just genius line. Like the dialogue is so great, the lines and just the little moments. There's so many of them in that movie. And, it's got the band of little people who are the thieves traveling through time. And I think and then you got the ogres and the giant, and that's all kind of fed into my love for the bizarre too. I think that's movie is part of what's responsible for everything I've loved thereafter. But that definitely stuck in my head. Another movie that stuck in my head. This is like, aside from, like, I love Star Wars and I love Superman. I think like every other kid my age did. I mean, so I loved all that stuff. But I also remember I watched The Elephant Man with my parents.
Wow.
And again, it must have been, I forgot if that was, what was that, 80, 81, 82, something like that. So I was a kid. Boy, that movie stuck with me
That's a
to this
very
day.
powerful film.
Yeah. And so that also has, stained my brain in some way with a love for the bizarre and the unusual, for sure.
Yeah. John Merrick, the man who was so terribly deformed, but was such a beautiful human being, and so scholarly and educated and thoughtful, and down the line. I mean, he's kind of emblematic of people that used to be called freaks. I'm remembering Todd Browning's film, which I'm sure you're familiar with, from the 30s, which now I guess would be considered so politically incorrect in so many ways. But, some people are just very different than most of us. And with that thought in mind, by the time that you were leaving elementary school, entering middle school, did you have a picture in your mind of what you wanted to be when you were grown up?
Yeah, I think I had a good idea by around 15 or so. So a couple of things. One is I always liked making stuff as a kid. I used to make these little magazines. I read a lot of Mad Magazine and Cracked Magazine, like the ripoff of Mad, basically.
Absolutely.
I loved it.
Alumni of the same.
Yeah, so I made my own called Smashed, and I made all these issues. It was just, for me, I'd show my parents and my sister, and then there was this program that came out for the Apple II Plus, which we got in 1984. And there was the first desktop publishing program that was ever made called the Newsroom. And I made these little newsletters called the Phony Baloney News. And I'd sell them at
like
school.
Much of it actually is.
Yeah, right. So basically it came with clip art. And I would find a piece of clip art and I'd write a story to it. And I looked back at these years later and these stories are kind of twisted. I was like, oh, these are crazy. So I used to love doing that stuff. So I was always really creative and liked making stuff. And I always pictured these things being like on a newsstand somewhere on a shelf, something that someone could buy. So this has always kind of been something in me. So then, so I was always creative. And then I used to watch a lot of Bewitched as a kid, the reruns on TV. And I love that. And so at one point, I remember my mom suggested, like, oh, maybe you should think about a career in advertising because you can be creative and, it's they pay you for it. And that's what Darren Stevens did in Bewitched. I'm like, oh, that looks like fun. Everything he did looked awesome. You had help from a witch, which was great. I don't have any of that help. But so I decided that I would go into advertising. And I pursued that. And that's what I've been doing for, 25 years now, which is crazy. But I've had a chance to work on some great brands and done some work I'm really happy about. But that's the day job, and then I've managed to see my books on stands now. So,
what do you actually do in the advertising world?
I'm a writer, creative director. So typically, I work with a partner or with teams, and we'll come up with ideas, concepts, and then make all kinds of ads. I've done everything from a Super Bowl commercial to stuff you'll see online, experiential things out in the world that you can, to the thing for IBM that celebrated their 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, where you could see yourself on a giant 30-foot screen reflected as an astronaut on the moon with 16G. All kinds of cool experiences that, help the brand. So a little bit of everything in that world.
I'm assuming you went to university or college. What did you study as a major?
Yeah, I went to Syracuse. The Newhouse School is great for advertising. So I was fortunate to be there for the 4 years that the professor I had was there. He then left when we all graduated. So he was amazing, great connections in the business.
Terrific.
So I studied advertising, but I also did a dual major in political philosophy, knowing that, just majoring in advertising, they didn't recommend that. And I thought that was smarter than not to recommend that. So I did a dual major, which was great because I could study other things that were of interest to me.
Do you, a side question, growing up and, being interested in the stuff that you're talking about, do you remember the very first time that you stumbled on the subject of UFOs?
Yeah, there's a couple moments. One is actually I have it over here. Hang on. I don't stretch this too much. Hang on. My mom used to order these books for me, those Time Life books.
Sure.
And so I this was one I got when it came out. So
I'm in that book.
Are you really? I gotta look at that.
It's a great series, by the way.
Right over here. Yeah, so I still have all those. So I had that, and I also bought Communion when it came out.
Oh boy!
And so those are the earliest things I remember specifically about getting into it and just being fascinated by these stories.
Communion, of course, impacted on millions of people, and being a bit of a, as a serious researcher back then, and a bit of a snob, in terms of source material, I thought, Time Life, oh, they're going to butcher this thing. And it was humbling. I thought they did a really fine job on that series. And since then, I've looked at other series that they've done, and they set the bar pretty high. And the production values are great on the books, too.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I'm glad I still have it.
Yeah, I've got that whole set, too. You have a library of books behind you. Did you start to build a library when you were younger, or it just sort of was matter of fact happened as you became a writer?
I'm very much a collector by nature, and so I've collected things, all kinds of different things. And what I've realized now is that writing the books allows me to collect even more. So, like when I wrote my book called American Sideshow, I was able to collect a lot more sideshow memorabilia because I could use it for the book. For books like the Mars book, the Ghost book, and now the UFO book, I'm buying tons of books for research.
Yes.
So that's adding up. And then part of my problem is like now I've grown to like having originals as much as I can.
I absolutely
When I was
understand.
younger, I wouldn't have cared about that, and now I'm like, oh, I want to get like the original copy of that, first edition if I can, or something early as possible. So I started, part of what got me into the Ghost book, I'm sure we'll get back to this later, but I started just buying a lot of old spiritualism books from the late 1800s because I loved the covers, I love the titles, I loved the stories within. And so these were like these wondrous books from another era with these amazing thoughts and ideas and beliefs, hidden within. So I just kind of love all that stuff. And this is just like part of I have a whole other big shelf downstairs with a bunch of stuff.
People occasionally ask me where and how I do my research. And in this day and age, most people simply assume that you go online and find stuff on the internet. Of course, it's an extraordinary resource, but it's a very double-edged sword. And there is nothing like real books and publications that have stood the test of time, with bibliographies and indexes and actual source material, is also a real satisfaction in having that original material in hand. When was it that you first became aware of this person who, today is like a footnote to history of entertainment, but back in the day, I think starting in the 20s, certainly 30s to the 40s, and, still continuing as an institution in a way, the man Robert Ripley?
So we used to watch, we had a little TV in the kitchen. It may have been black and white. Maybe we had a color one at some point in there. And we would watch Ripley's like a dinner a lot. And it was with Jack Palance.
Yes.
Was the host. And that, again, it must have been 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there. And so I loved watching the show. And then I think I may have had a few of the books, but it was more like watching the show early on. And I just loved it. There was also, like, at the same time, there was That's Incredible, which was kind of like the same thing, again, just amazing people with, incredible talents, abilities, or anomalies of some sort. And I love all those things. I think the thing about like human anomalies is I'm always just amazed at the different forms the human body can take on and how people can overcome certain things. That's why I was
Yeah.
always amazed by Robert Wadlow, the world's tallest man.
Yeah.
Nearly 9 feet tall. Like, who knew a human could get that big? It's amazing.
I think that's got to come with a set of problems that are just as big,
Yeah.
physiologically as well as emotionally, as well as socially, etc. I think the interior life that a lot of people live who are physical outsiders is a lot deeper than we consider. Fairly recently, within the last 2 months or so, I reread a novel I read when it came out maybe 15 years ago or so that was a huge bestseller at the time, Water for Elephants.
Mm-hmm.
And it deals with a young man who, at the height of the Depression, joins a circus. He is just about to graduate from Cornell Medical School. His parents die, doesn't get to graduate, but it's an extraordinarily well-written book that brings us into the world of the sideshow, among other things, and the people who populate it. Again, Ripley built a following back in the days when the media was primarily the newspapers and the radio, and had an international following. I don't know whether he's a New Yorker or not, but he was a very savvy self-marketer, and he began as a cartoonist. And you mentioned Jack Palance, who is such a striking actor physically and with a wonderful voice, and he must have had a great deal of fun being frontman for that show. The irony that came out with every single story that he told. But with Ripley in mind, I want to go through some pictures here. He, again, began as a cartoonist, and a cartoonist of the bizarre, so to say, and probably pretty much doing all of his work from his drafting table. And once his cartoons caught on and really became syndicated in papers around the country, he had a very major income, and then was able to travel the world, finding more weird stuff, writing about it very briefly, but with these wonderful illustrations that, as a kid, absolutely fascinated me. I remember probably as an 8-year-old or so, and probably through Ripley, if not through the Museum of Natural History, which, being lucky enough to grow in the greater New York area, was a mainstay for me and a lot of my friends. The idea that there were, these foreign tribes deep within the jungle who, when they would kill an enemy, they would sometimes put their head through this process where they would create this actual miniature shrunken head, which was delightfully terrifying and wonderful and weird. And I remember the pride I took when I got my first, I think I had 2 or 3, little rubber shrunken head. I eat your heart out on that. I don't know what happened to it, but here we have him with 2 different shrunken heads. Again, it captivates the bizarre in all of us. Very syndicated on quite a number of broadcast networks, as well as, I don't know, like 300 newspapers around the United States. Very natty dresser.
He really had just an extraordinary career. And he started his cartoon as a sports cartoon.
Right.
I think it was called Champs and Chumps.
Right.
And then I forgot if it was his editor or if he changed it to Believe It or Not, obviously, and then it completely graduated to the more bizarre. But
totally.
he had just a fascinating story and rise to success, and most well-traveled man in the world.
This is something most people know. Part of the tragedy of Van Gogh's, mental problems was cutting off part of his ear to give to a woman he was enamored by. But here it is, as sensationalistic as it can be, and cut off his own ear and handed it as a present to a girl named Gabby, who had asked him for a Christmas gift. Whoa. Spider with a Human Face, Optical Illusion. Gosh, it doesn't stop. A Simpler Time.
Yeah,
And now a very special Ripley cartoon.
that's right. This is one of my thrills and achievements in life, was getting my name in a Ripley's cartoon for submitting the idea of Oliver Cromwell's embalmed head. So
I
yeah, I
don't
can
think
see
it
my
gets
name right
much.
below there.
It doesn't get much better.
That was very exciting.
The embalmed head of Oliver Cromwell traveled throughout England for 300 years before being reburied, very nice, in 1960. Submitted by Marc Hartzman, New Rochelle, New York. Way to go.
Yeah, it's my way of getting in.
Meanwhile, in 1912, a Paris orphanage held a charity raffle. The prizes were babies. I'm sorry. And lastly, Penny Rackoff of Scottsdale, Arizona, has kept a cookie that her mother, first love, gave her inside a jewelry box for 85 years. Whew, I think we can pretty much end the show now. There is a world that you can riff on here and build on, and I just wanted to give folks an idea of, well, the books that you have written and the order that you have written them in. Found on eBay, American Sideshow, God Made Me Do It, The Antisocial Network Journal, Cromwell's Head, The Big Book of Mars, Chasing Ghosts, and your upcoming book that you are currently working on UFOs, but not a scientific scholarly book. I think the title suggests that you're going in another direction. It's titled right now, and I hope it comes out with this title. It works for me. Greetings, Earthlings.
Yeah, I think it's a fun title. I think it gives a kind of tone. It's meant to. It'll be like my Mars book and my Ghost book, and sort of all encompassing of different angles of the UFO and extraterrestrial experience throughout humanity. But all told for more of a mass audience and with a bit of a smile to it. But
I think there's a major need for at least one book like that now that the subject has finally penetrated into mainstream media, news, population at large, government, and it is a very serious subject. But we need to be able to laugh at ourselves and to laugh at things that are serious too. Also, as kind of a natural archivist myself, I have very serious files, but also the popular cultural aspects of the UFO subject I find fascinating. And the way the subject has been portrayed, mocked, praised, idealized, all very important aspects of the subject. So what I'd like to do is spend some time on each of your books, and no need to rush here. The first book that you wrote, The Antisocial Network Journal.
Yeah, that was the fourth one.
Oh,
yeah.
What's the
first one was found on eBay.
Then let's start with the first.
Yeah.
Where did you get the inspiration to write this book on a subject that I don't think anybody has ever written a book before in the history of modern times?
So this came about. So I mentioned before, like collecting sideshow memorabilia.
Yeah.
So I had so first of all, I was publishing a zine around this time. Started in around 95, 96. And eventually I went down. So the zine was about kind of whatever I was into at the time. And that was like sideshow stuff. So eventually it kind of really focused in on that. And there was a place in New York City on the Lower East Side called the Freakatorium. And it was run by, are you familiar with it?
I am. I've been there a number of times.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So the guy who ran it is a sword swallower named Johnny Fox. And he had been performing since the early 70s. And along his travels, he had amassed this amazing collection and opened up this little museum, very small but packed, like everything,
Yes.
walls, ceilings, amazing
Wonderfully eccentric,
presentation.
one of a kind little museum. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I just walked in. I'm like, oh my god, this stuff is incredible. I didn't know you could get this kind of stuff, you know. And so we became friends. I had written about him for the magazine. I wrote about him for Bazaar magazine, you know, out of the UK. And I guess at some point, I was like, where do you get all this stuff? You know, he's like, well, I collected along my travels, of course. But then he said, oh, I get a lot of stuff on eBay. I'm like, you can buy this stuff on eBay? I had no idea, because this was like 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. I guess I started in 2000. So I started finding some old Sideshow cabinet cards on eBay and buying them. And at some point I thought, like, is this weird that I'm buying these pictures of, you know, these Sideshow freaks on is this weird? Like, I don't know. I don't think it's weird because I like this stuff. But then I thought, well, there's probably stuff that everyone would consider weird, like objectively bizarre and just odd, right? So I thought, well, let me see what I can find. So I started just doing some weird keyword searches and finding these things that were really weird. And then I thought, I wonder how they would respond to some weird questions if I wrote them some weird questions. So I did that, and I found that the responses they would give were always like they were trying to make a sale. So whatever weird idea I had, they were like, yeah, that's a great idea. You know, or they'd give me a serious response. I'm like, this is hilarious. So one of the first ones, I'll see if I can find it in here really quick. I have a copy next to me. Yeah, this was one of my favorites. This is one that helped me get the deal for the book. This was the deer poop paperweight. And you can see like the craftsmanship that went into that. So I wrote them a question.
For a moment, I thought you said craftsmanship.
You know what? As I was saying it, I realized it was coming out that way, which is not a bad mistake.
I think it's a new word.
Yeah. So I asked her, I said, do you know where the poop was found? I'm a collector of animal droppings from around the world, and I'm curious as to whether this poop comes from an area I'm targeting. Also, is it a good, sturdy paperweight? And she wrote back and she said, I have Massachusetts and Maine white-tailed deer poop. The bottom of the paperweight is a heavy felt. I also have wild turkey poop, Massachusetts, and porcupine poop, Maine. So I was like, oh, you know, good. So so what I did was I collected a bunch of these correspondences and these weird auctions, and I found some publishers I thought might be interested and sent letters just on my own, you know, letters and envelopes at that time. And an editor wrote me back, and I couldn't believe it. I tried other book projects and got rejections, you know, so I had stacks of those. And he wrote me back. He's like, I've just, you know, his publisher had sent it on to him. He's like, I was reading through your proposal and I was cracking up. Can you send me a few more? So I sent him a few more. He's like, okay, I'm going to try and sell it in. And he sold it in. And then I got a bunch more weird stuff, filled the book.
I have to have some other examples, but first I have to ask you from a technical point of view, was this deer poop paperweight actually deer poop or cast resin painted to look like its original coloring? Or
I assume it's the real thing, you know, treated in some way. But what I love is, I mean, in the picture you can see she added like little crystal snowflakes and little evergreen like leaves and stuff. So she decorated it. And it's called, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's called the pooper weight, which I thought was pretty funny.
Well, that's worth the price right there.
So the pooper weight with a craftsmanship, you know, so.
Holy shit. No pun intended. Well,
I still have
pun intended. I expect so.
Yeah.
So basically this is, I'm going to collect shit and sell it on eBay.
Yeah. Literally.
Give us some other examples of some of the memorable things that you stumbled on.
Well, you saw on the cover there the John F. Kennedy garden gnome, which I really loved. And that one. So a lot of these things, my wife.
Actually, I want that.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? So there were some things I couldn't buy, and I was able to get pictures from the seller. Some things we bought just so I could get good photography for the book. And that one, I tried to bid on, but I didn't meet the reserve price. And so I emailed with the seller. I was like, hey, I really want this for my book. I described the book and everything. I had to, by the way, after the letters, I had to have everybody sign a release form. I had to be like, hey, by the way, I was just doing a book, you know. One guy got mad at me and said I wasn't, it was unscrupulous of me because he was selling used sweat socks. And I was making some jokes about that. And he was like, how dare you? What are your ethics? I'm like, you're selling used sweat socks on eBay. It's crazy. But so this guy I think he was in Germany, and he sent me the garden gnome. I sent him a deposit check. He sent me the garden gnome. We photographed it, sent it back, and he sent me back the deposit because he was like, I don't want to sell it to you just for that. So we worked it out.
You have a JFK garden gnome?
I had it briefly.
Fair enough.
This is one I don't know if you can see this. Am I doing this right? The goat toenail bracelet. Made of all goat toenails. That was a doozy. Still have that in my cabinet of oddities. Some corned beef.
Just a can of Libby's corned beef?
Yeah, and I said my grandmother collects canned meats, and I thought this would be a nice addition. She dusts them every Sunday and occasionally on Wednesdays if the week is especially dusty. Is it easy to open? I prefer not. That would deter her from ever eating it. And the seller wrote back and said, it doesn't seem easy to open. In fact, it requires a key, which may prove too much for grandma's arthritic, brittle fingers.
There is I know the world of collecting is in itself bizarre and very, very varied, but there are people that collect canned meat.
Oh, are they really? I just
no. I'm asking.
I have a can of rattlesnake meat in here as well. Which was funny. This one was fun. Here's a hornet's nest.
Right.
Which was nice. And I asked that person, I said, would hornets be attracted to this and seek shelter inside? Or can it be stuffed with candy and be made into a piñata? I do oddball children's parties. Thank you very much. And they said, no, the hornets would not be attracted to the nest. It would make a great piñata. I never thought of that. It has some beautiful pink and blue colors around it, that it would be perfectly safe. So yeah, of course.
Selling an empty hornet's nest on eBay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's
I guess there's hope for the human race in a weird way.
Those are fun.
What is that?
Funeral eye caps.
Oh.
I feel like I'm blocking part of the picture here. Yeah, a lot of weird.
Did you stumble on anything? Come upon? It's not fair to say that you felt really pushed the bounds of good taste, and I know you give things a lot of latitude, so to say. But how dare they? Or that's outrageous.
This page is kind of gross. This is can you see that? There's a wart, I think a toenail, and a picture of someone's colonoscopy colon. Yeah, it's called my colon.
A package.
Yeah,
you get all three?
No, all different sellers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just sort of a theme.
Yeah,
that was kind of gross. I think, yeah. I thought the used clothing, like the used socks and used underwear, that's just kind of gross. That didn't actually make it in for the reason I mentioned. I don't think I put used underwear in, but that was there for sure. Oh no, I do. I take it back. There's a Speedo. I forgot.
It makes you wonder in part, obviously, about somebody who says, I think I'm going to try to sell this.
Yeah.
I've got new underwear now.
Right.
And so, let's move this stuff out, as opposed to the people that buy it.
Yeah,
wow.
That's the thing. Is like these are all the sellers, but the buyers are another story altogether.
A colonoscopy photo. Wow, I need that for my collection.
This was just a weird one. A bowling trophy from 1960.
Good looking. Yeah.
And so I said, this is a real dandy. My mother stinks at bowling. She bowls a 70, and her friends make fun of her. Could I replace the plaque and pass this off as her own? That would shut those old bags up. And the person wrote back and said, what a great idea. The plaque could be replaced. Actually, how long has she been bowling? Maybe you could just add her name to it. Only problem, the bowler appears to be male. Good luck. So, yeah. This was another good one. Sorry, one more. This was the bull scrotum bag.
Oh.
That was a little bag made out of bull scrotum. Oh, which was part of a theme. And I asked this one. I said, hello, will this hold up okay if I serve fruit in it? Also, what do you do with the testicles? And the person said, yeah, I don't see any reason why not, since the bags are tan. Keep in mind that they should be kept dry. great for walnuts, I suppose. Testicles go to restaurants. Mountain oysters, they are called. I don't like them. They taste rather fatty and cost like hell. I also had, let me see if it's in here. Here it is. So this is a bull penis cane. And so I have this, and I had knee surgery about 8 years ago. And so I needed to walk with a cane for a bit.
Of course. And what better cane?
Yes. So I'm like, I have a cane. And it was especially helpful because I was working, in New York City and Manhattan. And, for a guy at that point, I was in my late 30s, about 40. And so I don't look like I should be walking really slowly like I had to, especially down the steps into the subway. So I'm just like an annoying guy in the way, like, what's wrong? So having a cane is like a good visual aid that, something's wrong with that guy, So I had my bull penis cane, and I'd walk around the office and people would be like, that's a cool cane. What is that? I'm like, it's a bull penis. It's like, what?
It's, depending on the person, that's either a conversation starter or a conversation stopper.
Exactly.
And if you're single, there's a pickup line in there somewhere. Who knew?
Yeah.
We could probably spend the whole show on this, but I'm compelled to move on. Your second book was the book about the sideshow reality, and again, there's a real poignancy to this in a more insensitive time, and a time where, I don't know, people were harder in terms of their outlook, or freaks were a perfectly acceptable thing to call people who either suffered hideous deformities or were incredibly overweight, or, hormonally challenged and, was a woman with a big beard or what have you, or sword swallowers or acrobats, or somebody who covered their bodies in tattoos at a time before now when a lot of people have a lot of tattoos on their body. I know, coming from my background as a painter, one thing I could always say about the painting I was doing was it had something to do with the painting I had just done. And in some way, either embracing or rejecting something about it, it would influence the painting I was going to do next. Do you remember, after you finished and published the eBay book, thinking, what do I do now?
Yeah. For sure. So I didn't show, but there's a couple sideshow related objects found on eBay. And I mentioned meeting with Johnny Fox at the Freakatorium, the zine I was doing. And so because of the zine, after I interviewed Johnny Fox, I started to meet other people, and, one person, connects you to another person. And so over several issues of doing that, I had a pretty good network within the sideshow community of different performers, and mostly,
wow,
the working acts, because that's more, what you see these days.
Yeah.
The sword swallowers and so forth, human blockheads and tattoos. Right. So bearded ladies as well, which are more natural born freaks. So my editor for Found on eBay said, hey, what are you thinking about? So I said, so I would like to do something about the sideshow. And I think he said, what about like an encyclopedia of sideshow performers? I thought, like, yeah, that sounds awesome. So I put together a proposal for that, and he ended up not selling it through, but he encouraged me to find an agent or another publisher. So I found an agent, and kind of a little stroke of luck, I didn't know how to begin that search. Again, this is not everything's easily online at this point. This was 2002, right. And I was at Barnes & Noble, and I used to like to just, if I was killing time in a city or something, I'd go into Barnes & Noble and look at some magazines, and usually just look at some and then, leave. If I was like meeting somebody and I had like a half hour to kill, So I found this Writer's Digest magazine, and the cover said 25 literary agents you should know or who want your work, or some headline like that. I'm like, oh, let me look at that. And I'm looking through it, and I'm like, it's time to go. I'm like, maybe I should buy this magazine. It's like
an investment in your future.
A light switch went off, like, whoa. So I purchased the magazine, and I was flipping through at home, and I start like marking the ones that seemed like they might be interested in something like that, like some kind of pop culture interest. And so I emailed a few or wrote some letters. And so I heard back from this one agent who had just read a book called Geek Love, which is a pretty well-known novel written, I think late 80s, if I remember correctly. It's a great book. I had read it also. And so she was interested in the topic and told me what to do for a proposal. So I did that. She signed me, had me sign a contract with her. And she actually got 2 offers in the same day for it. So we went with Tarcher, which is part of Penguin. But, I had this great network, like I said, built up to help me meet all these new performers and older performers. I spoke with showmen who've been in the business since the late 40s, and who worked with everybody from the mid-century, knew them all, had so many stories to tell. And we traveled and met with them and, went down to Gibsonton, Florida and met with Ward Hall, who's one of those 2 showmen I mentioned. The other was Bobby Reynolds out in California, went to his house and he let us rummage through all of his stuff, told us all of his stories. He had to leave for a couple hours. He's like, go through all the stuff you want. We actually brought a scanner to his house and scanned a bunch of stuff.
Wonderful.
It was amazing. I mean, it was so great. And Ward Hall we'd spend all day talking to Ward. And then he drove us around Gibsonton. Gibsonton, if people watching don't know, that's where sideshow performers would retire in winter for decades, going back to the early 50s.
Yeah.
And it was just so incredible to hear their stories and, to meet with them and see, get pieces of their collection. So, I mean, those were just a few examples of people we got to meet with. And I had also met with, I think I saw you the image of Melvin Burkhardt on my backwash cover, who has the human blockhead. And we met with him. He was 94 years old when we met with him in Gibsonton. And he put on the whole show for my wife. There he is. So he's 94 right there. And he popularized the act of the human blockhead. Anyone you see doing it now, they often either credit him or oftentimes use his patter almost as is. So he was just an amazing guy. He was a magician. He did everything. He did sleight of hand right in front of me with these 94-year-old hands I couldn't believe. So I believe I was the last person to interview him. He performed a month later at Todd Robbins' wedding in New York City. I interviewed him in September. He sadly passed away in November of.
Oh my gosh!
That was, I think, 2001. So, so that was amazing. So I had all these, great experiences and opportunities to meet with these people, and was able to write this book, which I'm thrilled to see, like, how it's inspired other people. I always found the stories to be really inspirational stories. Some people look at it as sad stories or exploitative stories.
Yeah.
I see people who overcame enormous challenges.
Yeah.
And at a time when you would have no other options. I mean, your options were institutionalization, hidden away at home.
Yeah.
Not much. And so they got to travel the world. The freaks were the kings of the sideshow. They made tons of money. And they had camaraderie. There's a great quote in the book I have about a showman who said, like, where else can, a guy with no legs and a guy with no arms and a woman with a beard and, conjoined twins all sit around and, play a game of poker and go and travel the world or something like that. Doesn't happen anywhere else, So many of them found love and had families and found ways to support their own families because of the money they were making. So there's a lot of, I think, wonderful stories. And I love seeing the book show up in other people's bibliographies. People have reached out to me and about novels they've written and got information. So it's been great. That cover picture since you have that there, can I share a quick story about the cover?
Yes, please.
This is one of my favorite sideshow stories just that happened in history. So that's Johnny Eck, the half boy, who was, if you go to Ripley's auditoriums, you usually see Johnny Eck statues there. And, they have a little thing usually you can go under and see yourself as a half person through mirrors and such.
Was he born this way?
Yeah.
Gosh.
So he was born that way. And that's his twin brother right next to him. So what they would do, they had this stunt and he's in the movie Freaks, by the way. You see him running around effortlessly in Freaks, and it's just watching him move is unbelievable. If you haven't seen him, just Google or look up YouTube for Johnny Eck and watch him move. It's amazing. He had just amazing dexterity, and he did a little bit. He painted also. He did all kinds of amazing things with his life. So in the 30s, they would do this magic trick where the magician would call up a volunteer from the audience, and it was the old saw the person half trick. And so the twin brother, full size, would volunteer. He would go up, he would get in the box, and the magician would saw the box in half,
Oh my
spread the box
God.
apart. The trick, right?
Yeah.
Put it back together, open the box, and then he would get out of the box and start to walk back to his seat. But as he was leaving the stage, he'd split in two, and the torso, Johnny Yak, would run this way, and the legs would run this way. And what they had done was they swapped out the brother Robert for a little person with pants pulled up over their head, and Johnny would set their shoulders to be the top.
Holy moly!
And it's like, wow,
Talk
they could
about
do that,
theater. That's
people fainted. So they didn't do it too often, I think, because I think they had to stop because people were too terrified by it.
You remind me, a dear friend of mine who passed some years ago, Miles Barth. Miles was a photo historian of the First Order. He wrote the definitive book on Ouija, became so close that he ended up with Ouija's ashes. But he wrote a book called Step Right This Way. It's one of the most beautiful period circus photograph books imaginable. I think the man's name was Kelty. He was itinerant. He just was a brilliant photographer. He followed circuses through the Depression. And Miles was able to chase down the negatives. I mean, that's how he paid his bills, with negatives and prints, and produced this gorgeous book. And I'm reminded that the derivation of the term sideshow was when the big top trains, because most of the circuses, they traveled by train, and they would do a few nights in one town, then go on to the next and on to the next and on to the next. And the amount of work to set up and take down and get the animals out, get the animals in, was phenomenal. But leading up to the entrance to the big top was the midway. And along all the sides were these smaller tents with big banners, the side shows, as opposed to the main show. And that's where you would go, each one would have a barker out there drumming up business of, see whatever, the alligator man or whatever. And the entire subculture. Well, I must read this book next. This is, again, it appeals to the prurient part of myself about the strange and the humanity of these people who developed their own culture, and many of them extremely well-read, better traveled than most people, including going to Europe, meeting crown heads at times. What a project to immerse yourself in. In your collection, do you have any of the original, broadsides, the signs that were painted either on cloth or, printed on banners and things, that kind of thing?
Mostly what I have are the cabinet cards that they would sell as souvenirs. So there were a few famous photographers. Charles Eisenman was one of them, who did a lot of sideshow performers in the late 1800s. So I have a bunch of the cabinet cards, and like I said, they were useful for the book. I have some giant rings, which I love. Giant rings that, they're like a silver dollar would fit in them. And I do have a wonderful sideshow banner in our dining room that was not from like the golden age, but probably about 20 years old now, from Marie Roberts, who does all the paintings at Coney Island for all the sideshow banners.
Oh, cool.
So that's really a special thing we have here.
I have held one of Barnum's giant rings, in that I went to school originally, before I went to visual arts in New York, to University of Bridgeport in Connecticut. And Bridgeport, of course, was where P.T. Barnum's estate was. And the original Barnum Museum, before it moved down to Florida, was in this big old funky loft building. And, as an art student interested in the unusual, I would wander there usually a couple of times a year. And I remember you'd walk up one flight of stairs, and at the top of the stairs was the rattiest, most unkempt, saddest, full-size taxidermied elephant you have ever seen in your life. And Mrs. Seeley, a big name in Connecticut, in that area at the time, Mrs. Seeley was the curator, and was charming and funny and wonderfully forgetful. and she would leave stuff out, and there would be the Giant's ring on top of the glass counter where it was, Mrs. Seeley says, "Oh yes, could you put it back in there?" And of course, the thing for me, being involved in graphics as a young artist and studying design, working briefly out of high school in an advertising agency, were these wonderful golden age circus graphics, which defy reason. These beautiful lithographs that anybody would want on their wall. I could go on, but we are coming into the end of our first hour, so this show is so much fun, Mark. This is Peter Robbins and my special guest tonight, Marc Hartzman, and you are watching or listening to Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we will be back in 3 to 4 minutes. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
And we are back with Meanwhile Here on Earth. Peter Robbins with my guest tonight, Marc Hartzman. And Mark, before we go on to the next book, I pulled this during the break. The book is called Step Right This Way.
Yeah.
And it is the photographs of Edward J. Kelty. One of the things about Miles that made him so good at his job, he was a real perfectionist. And these books would often be printed in Italy at the finest printing factories imaginable for high quality reproductions, where they had a small residence in the factory, in the printing area, where they would wake you up at 2 a.m. to bring you out to check the test press, the first stuff to come off the press to make sure it was, good enough for you. And just to give you some ideas, the format is just everything just so. And often, panoramic group pictures. Anyway.
Yeah, he did all the big sideshow group pictures as well.
Exactly. This one, published by Barnes & Noble, and a really remarkable book. Now, the next one, I would say, probably would be considered as controversial. It's, for some people, it's just outrageous. For other people, it's to react in a way that's in any way mocking is blasphemous. But my history of regarding people in public life who said, God told me to, sometimes told them to do good things and, follow in a righteous path. Other people are just either out of their minds or outrageous, or I'm not the right person to be commenting on this. But the book in question is God Made Me Do It. True stories of the worst advice the Lord has ever given his followers. Let's, once again, where did you get the idea to have the guts to put this one together?
So I always keep a list of book ideas because I'll just have quick thoughts and I jot them down. and it's good to sometimes refer back to it. I had been doing that. And after the American Sideshow book came out, I was like, okay, let me just look back at my list. And I had this book. The original title was called "Shut Up, God," which I really liked. Thought that was like really provocative.
Kind of.
Yeah. As you can see, the publisher decided not to go with that title.
Smooth move.
Kind of late in the game, actually. I was like, how can you not go with this? Anyway.
This is great, though. It's a wonderful title.
Yeah, I'm happy with where it landed. But, I guess this one doesn't really spin off of American Sideshow necessarily, but it is full of unusual stories. And I guess the sort of the genesis for this one was, I love sports. I say I grew up in Denver. I'm a huge Broncos fan, a big Nuggets fan. And I just never get when people thank God after they win. Is God like the biggest fair weather fan ever? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Usually it's a different team that wins the Super Bowl every year. If God had a favorite and he could control it, they'd be winning. And why is he even watching football when there's so many things going on in the world? So it's just all these things are kind of going through my head. So anyway, I'd written down the idea, "Shut Up, God," and sort of the loose idea. And I mentioned it to my agent, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love that idea. Let's do that." She said, "So you gotta go dig up a bunch of examples of these quotes." I think I had a few, and let's see if there's enough to fill a book. And she's like, "You need to get 50 of them just so that the publisher feels confident." I was like, "Oh, well, let me see. I don't really know. I haven't looked into it much yet." So I start doing, this American Sideshow was a very involved book. I had to do a ton of interviews. I had to travel,
Yes.
transcription, all these things, right? Finding, sourcing images. God Made Me Do It was like a breath of fresh air to write. It was like I could just do research on my own. I didn't have to rely on the interviews or get in touch with people. It was just stories I could dig up from the archives and something I could do because of the internet, really, which is wonderful. So I would do searches like God told me to, God made me, God said to, the Lord told me to, the Lord said to, the Lord told him, the Lord told her, all these different searches in newspaper archives, various archives. I used to love going to the New York Public Library on the way to work when you couldn't access their archive online at that point, the New York Times archive and a few others. And I would collect a bunch of, they had you could use their computers, and from the library you could access these archives. So I would go in the morning.
One of my favorite places.
Yeah. Me too. I love it. And I collect a whole bunch of stories. I just find them and email them to myself, find an email, and then I go into work. And then on the way home, I had my commute to New Rochelle. I could start working on those stories and write them up. So the morning was like research, and the way home was like starting to write stuff. If I could do like one or two a day, I was in good shape, So I couldn't believe how much I would find. And the stories were just crazy in all sorts of ways. Some of them were just quirky and funny. just odd, like God told me to direct traffic topless, or, God told me to juggle outside of Terry Schiavo's hospice, or, God told me to build a statue of Jesus out of toothpicks. And the guy had no art training and a bum hand from, a work injury, but he spent 10 years building this toothpick Jesus with 35,000 toothpicks or something like that. So like there were weird things like that. And then there were like darker stories, God told me to cut off my hand, or, all kinds of just weird, dark things. There were some were so dark, I opted to not include them because it was too disturbing. That said, there's stories about like God told me to eat this person. So there's like some cannibalism, That's not the darkest. Like I said, I got rid of the darkest stuff. So there was just all sorts of weird, bizarre stories to share. There was a guy who fasted forever because God told him to, and finally broke his fast with squirrel soup because God said he could. So basically the book, I'll just give you a quick sample here so you can see what I'm talking about. Like,
as you assess this material in your own mind, were you thinking some of these people seem incredibly sincere, and they're dedicated to this project, they're doing it because they genuinely feel that God has willed them to do it, where other ones did their goals suggest that they were mentally ill?
I imagine that there's a little bit of that. Some of them I think did feel very sincere, and some of them were like, the evangelist. There's definitely some of those guys who are just, probably for business reasons, they're saying these things, right? Which is just crazy. I'm trying to find the one I just mentioned.
There are quite a number of politicians have.
This was a good one. Can you see that? Toilet paper tabernacle.
Oh my.
So the quote is, God told me to TP the police station. And so then I'll just show, like, I'll give some context of what that story was about, what was going on. So it's the kind of book you turn to any page. Here's one from one of the preachers. The quote here on this one is, the Lord spoke to me and said, you believe for citation 10 right now. Father, we receive it. We receive it as a gift from on high. It will never, ever be used for anything other than what is becoming to you, Lord Jesus. And that's Kenneth Copeland, who's, made millions spewing this kind of stuff. And he was just doing whatever he wanted with this jet that people paid for because they believed that God told him to. There was the juggling one. God told me to come and juggle. He traveled 408 miles to juggle outside of Terry Schiavo's hospice in 2005. It didn't work. She didn't get better. All the juggling in the world. Despite
but
God.
it's in no way a bad thing. It's harmless at worst.
Exactly.
Did you encounter statements from well-known people as well as regular man or woman on the street?
The well-known people. There's a few athletes I have in here. Some of those evangelists I mentioned. I think there might be a few other celebrities, if I remember correctly. No, that wasn't OJ. That was about OJ. Most of them are just random people who had these weird experiences and did these crazy things, because God told them to. These are some of the more disturbing ones I'm looking at right now. Maybe
What's an example of a really disturbing one for you?
So, this one is, God didn't say to mutilate her. He just said to hit her until she was dead. And that was a guy who was known as the want-ad killer, explained to the court why he eventually stopped hitting his victim when he erroneously thought she was dead in 1975. That was Harvey Lewis Carignan of Fargo, North Dakota, excuse me.
Were there any that struck you as, wow, what a noble thing? This sounds like a really good idea to me. This sounds like something worthy, and you could do a great deal of good following, your interpretation of what God has asked you to do.
I think that I did come across stories like that, as I remember. they're not in the book because there definitely are a lot of those kinds of stories. And that to me is where like religion is a good thing. When it compels you to do good, that's its purpose, right? Those stories, I tried to find stories that were going to be entertaining and strange and make you be like, wow, it's crazy. Yeah. If I go with the good stories, it becomes a different book. So they're more of the weird, bizarre, I can't believe this person did this kind of thing stories.
What's about the strangest one, or one of the most memorable ones for you in terms of that you haven't forgotten it and it jumps into your mind like right now when I ask?
Oh, the toothpick guy I mentioned is one of my favorites. Just because he put so much effort into this, because he believed God told him to build this toothpick Jesus. And like I said, he had no art training at all.
How tall was the toothpick Jesus?
I think it was like, let me see if I can find it again really quick. I just had it. It was, I think, bigger than life size.
Wow.
As I remember.
And the resemblance was fairly solid?
I could not find a picture of it.
Interesting.
Yeah. None of the articles ever showed it,
but he completed it.
Yeah, I think it took him 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having trouble. Oh, here it is. Yeah, so the quote is, I was in my work truck when God told me to use toothpicks to build a life-size Jesus. I said, gee, I can't do that. You're asking me to undertake a task that will take 10 years. And so he had no formal art training. He had nerve damage in his left hand because he used jackhammers for his work. He used 65,000 toothpicks, super glue, and tweezers. He was divorced and lost his job toward the end of the project, so that helped him find some more time. And I thought I had the height. The sculpture was suspended by wire in his garage and illuminated with a spotlight. He called it the gift, a name he claimed God suggested. I think I know what God's doing. He said he wants to inspire people.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that one to me was one of those harmless ones, and just like, wow, the amount that went into that was quite something.
You complete this book, you publish it, and there's a period of time that you're thinking, what should my next book be about? And it turned out to be about one of the most influential entities out there in modern life, something that I don't think we'd have imagined as kids. And it's an aspect of the internet. And of course, it is social networking. But in this case, you're coming at it from another point of view. What inspired this book? And it says, a private place for all the thoughts, ideas, and plans you don't want to share. Fill us in.
This was just, my irritation in social media. People posting, here's what I had for dinner tonight, every moment of every day. I mean, there's plenty of good things I think that come from social media, but there's so much stuff that's like, why do I need to know all this stuff? And why do you want to share all this stuff with everybody? So the subtitle to me explains it all, that you can write some things down that for yourself, but not everyone has to know it. So basically, I mean, this book was the easiest book to write because, it's a blank book. But what I did is like not every page, but a lot of pages have like a line at the bottom there. This one says, the one I just opened, this book offers one location-based service. It won't tell anyone where you are. So everything just kind of poked fun. This page I'm looking at says, friend someone in person today. Practice, user content. So again, just all little things kind of poking a little bit of fun,
I guess,
and reminding you that you can write things down your own, and it's okay if the world doesn't know a thought that you had.
Did your agent or your publisher balk at the idea of publishing a book that kind of comes off a little like an existential joke with a lot of white paper and very little text?
So this was one, this publisher is called Knock Knock, and they make a lot of journals. That's kind of their thing. They do journals and like other sort of kitschy products and stuff. So it was just, sent them the idea, and they were like, yeah, they just started taking submissions from writers. So they liked it. They're like, yeah, we want to do this. So it was just a quick, fun thing to be able to do. I'm thrilled with how it came out, and I love that they did it. And I just, I think still holds up today.
What was the most memorable, or a couple of the most memorable statements in the book for you?
Just trying to remember some of them. Let me look here really quick. Like this one says, make a bigger statement by not tweeting, which I thought was nice. This one I really liked. This one is maybe one of my favorites. It says, spend less time online and you'll have more to write about. Just with the idea of like, get out there and experience life in the world around you, as opposed to scrolling through social media all day. You're just missing everything.
Yeah.
So that would be one that I thought really encapsulates the idea of the book nicely.
You finished this book, and I know for me, in thinking about having you as a guest on, I stopped cold at the next book. I don't know if you kind of chose it because of the bizarre aspect specifically, or you have much interest in the history of England. As somebody who does have a great interest in the history of England and the UK, and having visited the United Kingdom at least 20 times, Oliver Cromwell is such a pivotal figure in English history. So let's begin with you telling our viewers and listeners something about who this man was while he was alive before we get to the subject of his embalmed head.
Sure. So Oliver Cromwell was the Lord Protector of England, Ireland, and Scotland in the mid-1600s. He had led the charge for the parliamentarians in the English Civil War against Charles I. And so he was, instrumental figure behind the beheading of Charles I. So that happened in 1649, I believe, when Charles I was beheaded. And so after that ended the monarchy in England. Yes. That was it. And so Cromwell took over a few years later as Lord Protector. And then he passed away in 1658. His son took over as Lord Protector, but then he abdicated. And Charles II, who had fled, came back and restored the monarchy. That's called the Restoration.
Right.
That's why there's still monarchy in England, because he came back.
Yes.
That's a nutshell of Oliver Cromwell. But
I have to tell you, in terms of graphics, I love this cover. This is gorgeous. It's reminiscent of, a number of traditions, but it reminds me a bit of the wonderful work of, I'm blanking at the moment, kind of the godfather of dark children's stories. I'll think of it. Yes, Edward Gorey.
Edward Gorey?
Who riffed on this kind of graphic. And I think he would have approved this cover, no question about it. And it's a memoir. So it's not just about the embalmed head of Oliver Cromwell. Is it a memoir, so to say, of the Cromwell family or of that moment in English history?
It's the memoir, 300 Years of Adventures of the Embalmed Head. So what happened was, after Cromwell died, he was embalmed.
And how did he die? A natural death, or was his life taken from him?
No, a natural death. Some illness. I forgot the specific illness right now, but he was not murdered. No. So he was embalmed and he was buried in Westminster Abbey. And then when Charles II came back, 1661, he restored as I mentioned, restored the monarchy. So he exhumed the body of Cromwell because he was mad about, the beheading of his dad and the whole thing that happened. So, he wanted to get a little revenge. So he exhumed the body and he hanged the body along with two of the other regicides who were involved, beheaded Cromwell. And so he took that embalmed head and he put it on top of a spike atop Westminster Hall. And so this embalmed head, still with features, show a picture, actually. I have a picture in the book. It sat up there on this pike for 25 years. And eventually it was blown off in a storm. Here's a picture from the 1930s of the head. That's the real thing right there.
I mean, exposed to the elements and everything?
Exactly, yeah.
Whoa.
So it fell off. So it was like an iron tip through the head, but then like a wooden stake. So eventually the weathering, I guess, made the stake break off, fell to the ground. A sentry picked it up, took it home, like under his jacket. It's like, you don't want to be caught with Cromwell's head.
I guess.
So he hid it in his chimney till he was on his deathbed, and he told his family that he had Cromwell's head in the chimney. The family didn't want it, so they sold it to an early museum owner who kept it for a while, and then a relative supposedly laid claim to it. And it ended up just passing through various hands until eventually it fell into the possession of one family, which then passed it down for 5 generations.
Whoa.
And so it went from 1661 to 1960 when it was reburied at Sydney Sussex College, which was his alma mater, and that's at Cambridge University. So it's in the antechapel there with a marker that says Cromwell's head is here, but the specific spot is not disclosed. So
again, what was the reason for displaying it in Hall?
At Westminster Hall? Oh, it's a deterrent. Don't come after me, or you end up here. You might remember Game of Thrones season 1.
So
that kind of thing.
Was this in the equivalent of the news of Cromwell's head is gone and we want to know where it is, or it just kind of disappeared out of people didn't talk about it? It was just, an artifact that disappeared, and meanwhile it was living this secret life, going from family to family, person to person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so basically the book follows these adventures. And I have in the back of the book, it shows you the true history that I follow. But then obviously because it's an embalmed head and I'm giving it a point of view, I'm filling in some gaps with anecdotes. And it gets into a lot of the family history, so you're able to learn more about the real history of Cromwell through his memories and observations.
Good.
So I'm able to weave in a lot of the real history. But then I weave in a lot of real events as well. So things that were actually happening at these different time periods, he's commenting on from his perspective and how he would view it, being, he was an innovator in terms of the military. He had a lot of innovative ideas.
Very important figure. So
he brings that kind of thinking to different things he's observing out in the world, like the car, like, oh, look at this thing, even the bicycle, like, wow. So he's always got his perspective on new inventions and what's happening and wars going on. So, so I kind of fill in gaps with things happening for real. And so I have the 2 lists. Here's the actual, it follows the true history of who had the head when, in as much as I could, there were different events, like he was put on display in 1799. So I tell that whole story. That's all real, but then obviously I'm coming up with my own observations because, it's
as a writer, sometimes you can, what Alfred Hitchcock called the MacGuffin, the widget, a device that allows you to tell a story through the device, and to be able to talk about this era in the history of England because of this artifact. I think that's wonderful and very clever. I'm more curious to know if you were able to get into, pardon the analogy, get into the heads of any of the people who kept the head. What was going on with them? What was their incentive? What was driving them to be the curator of the head of one of the most famous, movers and shakers in, Middle English history?
I get, I guess, a little bit into that, but it's mostly around Cromwell's observations. all coming, from him. So, but, he'll talk about what's going on with his different, caretakers, so to speak. I prefer to say caretaker than owner, momentarily watching over the head until the next person. But it also gets a lot into, there was in reality, a lot of people were questioning whether this was the authentic head. And so that, of course, irritates Cromwell, to not be respected as who he is, but also to know that someone else might be trying to pass themselves off as him. So I go through like the real history of different tests that were done and ways of trying to find the real proof that this was definitely Cromwell. And then it also gets into the, one thing I've always wondered about since I was a kid was whether burial is the wrong thing. Is that a big mistake? What happens to our consciousness? This kind of goes into my ghost book.
Sure.
And so this was a fun way to explore those thoughts as well, because he's reliving his life when he's buried at Westminster Abbey, and then he gets released back into the world. And though he can't speak or anything, he can observe, because I've made up these rules, but because he can observe, he's able to get this new lease on life, so to speak. And he realizes that people like Charles II, who eventually is going to pass away, is going to be buried, and he's going to be trapped in darkness for eternity. And that gives him some satisfaction. And at one point he meets with the head of Joseph Haydn, who was another head that traveled for 145 years before it was reburied. They meet at a phrenologist's office because they both have a history with phrenologists. And so they discuss ideas of what should be, how the dead should be cared for, and the different kind of network they could have if allowed. So it gets into all these kind of fun, quirky ideas.
I remember a few short years ago, the body of, it was either Richard II or Richard III. Some sharp viewer or listener probably knows the answer, and let us know if you do, was found under a parking lot and reinterred at Westminster Abbey. And it made the news as such. When Cromwell's head reappeared, number one, what's the backstory with that curator and why they decided to give it back to England? And did it make the news? Was this a story that really, hit the papers and received commentary in 1960?
Yeah, I was able to find articles from 1960 when it happened, for sure. And yeah, I mean, it made the news quite a bit, late 19th and early 20th century. I was able to find, I went to Cambridge and I went to the archives at Sydney, Sussex. They had a file on the Cromwell head. And so I got to go through all the files and found all these original typewritten notes and messages and handwritten letters going back to early 1800s about, testing for the authenticity of the head and people going to visit the head. I mean, all sorts of amazing documents. A few of them are reproduced in the book as well. But yeah, I mean, there was a pretty well documented history of this head.
And the individual or family that returned the head, they knew it was Cromwell's head. Had it been in that family for some years or generations, or what were they about? I mean,
yeah, it was about 5 generations. So really, it's a 300-year history. About 150 years was with the family. They were the Wilkinson family. And by this 5th generation, the guy just thought this was enough. He just thought it was enough for the head of traveling and thought it should be reburied. And that was the respectful thing to do. So that was his attitude. And then I won't spoil the ending, but
please.
Yeah. But it's all, like I said, all based on the real history.
Okay. It doesn't come back to life, though.
No.
Good. That's fine. You finish this book and you go to a very different subject, and it's the subject that connected us up and introduced us. And I have read and enjoyed it and look forward to reading other books. But your book on, the Big Book of Mars. I enjoyed this on a number of levels. First, because as a kid, I think like a lot of kids of my generation, we weren't talking about the galaxy or the cosmos or, what we were seeing with the Hubble telescope. We were talking about our little solar system and our 9 planets, and poor Pluto gets demoted some years ago. 8 planets and this little thing that's out there too with our various moons. And for me, as a boy, I understood something about the stars and galaxies, but I would go to Hayden Planetarium, attached to the Museum of Natural History, and, sit in the audience with that huge Zeiss projector that would project the entire sky at night. And, you'd be a wonderful school trip. But Mars was the planet that most captured my imagination. And I remember, I think we were talking about this, one of our calls, that the Museum of Natural History, like all museums, sold postcards. And when I was a kid, they were, I think, 5 cents, 10 cents, and then you could get these giant 25-cent postcards, or maybe they were 15 cents. And one of them was this view. Of course, this is like the late 1950s. It was wonderfully illustrated, but, informed speculation of the Earth from the moon. And I did a Crayola drawing of it. I'm still very proud of that drawing. It hangs in my house. And in the sky, you find out in the written part of the back of the post office that little red dot off there is Mars. And I remember at night, without too much ambient light, always looking for Mars, because that's the planet where we suspected there were Martians. And popular culture fed that like crazy, and still does. I think one of the funniest movies in American popular culture, and certainly in the world of science fiction, is Mars Attacks. It's so goofy and so over the top. And I just laugh thinking about it. When you think of bad aliens, those Martians, they're bad. And the goofy human cast attached, I could go off on tangents here, but there is something about Mars also, because in the 19th century, it was speculated by some of the most distinguished astronomers, I guess Lowell more than anyone else, that there were canals on Mars, and that they were manufactured, and that there was life there. And that was terribly exciting stuff. What happened in your electrical synapses from going from that orb that is Cromwell's head to that orb that is the planet Mars?
One thing I love about just reading and writing it stuff is you never know where ideas are going to come from.
Exactly.
The Cromwell head, I didn't expect to be writing that, but I stumbled upon the phrenology story surrounding Joseph Haydn and started looking for other stories, found the Cromwell story, and then there I go, right? So I had started, toward the end of 2016, I started a website called weirdhistorian.com. And so I was looking I had a bunch of stories to start with from previous writings, but I thought, okay, I got to find something new. And I thought somewhere I had read about Nikola Tesla trying to contact Mars in the early 1900s. So I thought, well, maybe let me see if I can find some articles about that, and I'll write something for my website about that. And so I looked through some newspaper archive services, and I stumbled upon a different story entirely, which was about a London lawyer in 1926 who was in telepathic communications with a Martian woman named Umaruru, which is a great name. And there were descriptions of Umaruru and the Martians and how they were living. And this was in like New York Times and all kinds of newspapers around the world, by the way. This wasn't like some little fringe newspaper in the middle of nowhere. This was like global coverage, because he was having telegrams sent to Mars from the largest radio tower in the world, which was Rugby Radio Tower in London. And Mars was in opposition. So it was around 35 million miles away. So I thought, if this is the time to do it, we're going to send this communication to Mars, and we'll have their scientists receive it and send it back. And you can meet these Martians I've been telepathically communicating with. And of course, they didn't hear back, And he was mad because he thought our scientists were too stupid to know how to receive the Martian communications. And Umaruru said that they were sent, and the scientists were like, it's not our fault they can't get them. So I was just fascinated by the story. And now I'm following because this is going on for days. And then 2 years later, he tries it again when Mars is once again opposition. So I just couldn't believe this amazing story I'd stumbled upon. And then as I'm researching that more, I start learning about all the other stories on the periphery that were going on. Of course, Lowell. But aside from Lowell, there were other distinguished people and brilliant minds who were thinking of ways that we could communicate with Martians or receive their communications, heads of Harvard and other distinguished universities. So it's like legitimate. And the whole thing, by the way, gives great context to why War of the Worlds in 1938 freaked out so many people.
Yes.
Because to me, like, I always knew that story, but it always sounds like, oh, how can people think of that? That's so crazy. But then when you realize that for decades, papers like the New York Times have been having headlines about we could be speaking with, Tesla says we'll be communicating with Martians any day now.
Yeah.
All these brilliant people say that. Well, you've been primed to believe that this could happen any time. And then obviously Wells did it so brilliantly.
Oh.
I mean, everything around it was just genius. I can't believe the guy was like 23, I think, when he did it. But it's not hard to see how they could believe it, if you missed the note at the beginning.
Oh.
So anyway, I got so fascinated by all those stories. And I originally had written a big article about Umaruru for Mental Floss and wanted to do more. I had also gotten, by the way, a whole PDF packet from the British Telecommunications Archive, like 250 pages on this case of documents, letters, notices, memos from the Post.
Oh, how wonderful.
Just a whole treasure trove. So I'm like, I got to do more, So I actually pitched a book that was going to be called The Book of Martians. And I thought it would be fun to show pop culture Martians, this guy's belief from telepathic communications, Nikola Tesla's, obviously I found out about the stories I was looking for, but just different scientific beliefs. And there were so many illustrations that were made because they knew about certain physics on the planet. So I thought, because the gravity is 1/3, they're going to grow taller. So they're going to be they could be 9-10 feet tall. And because the air is thinner, they might have larger chests to be able to breathe in the air. Like Hugo Gernsback had great illustrations. Hugo Gernsback, for those who don't know, coined the term science fiction. If there's a word called the Hugo Award for Science Fiction, which is named after him. He did tons of magazines. So he had these great illustrations and comments on what he thought Martians would look like. So that was the original idea. And then when Quirk got interested, they suggested expanding it to Mars and making Mars like the big pop culture type of hero. And that sent me on a path I never expected to go down, which was much more research. Found myself talking to all kinds of amazing people at NASA, working on the different rover missions, the Viking mission from the 70s. I mean, I couldn't believe the people I got to speak with. It was such a thrill. Just amazing. Yeah. So it was fun to share all these stories. A lot of stories I think were left to the world of science that they knew, but I don't think the public knew, like the fact that life was found on Mars on the Viking mission. The results came back positive for life on Mars. And the data has never been disproven to this day, but no one's chosen to recognize it as true or tried to retest it to see if they get the same results, years later with new equipment. So there's just amazing stories in the book.
You make me think of so many things while you're speaking. Number one, the original War of the Worlds, of course, is published in 1899, I believe, in London. And the version that comes down to us from 1938 is adapted from that. And Wells chose a wonderful screenwriter who also wrote radio plays, very popular at the time, named Howard Fass. Fass knew he had to update it. One thing he had going for him was the concern, the anxiety, the paranoia going on in the United States at that very moment. We were Europe was a month and a half into World War II. Mm-hmm. And the concerns in America were very understandable. Also, it was a much simpler time. It's hard to transpose or understand a certain lack of sophistication, which ain't a bad thing, and that he rewrote it in such a manner that he collapses time. I've listened to it many times. I even have the LP version of it at the wonderful sleeve. And we have several weeks, as I recall, or longer passing in a much more compressed time. It's a radio show with breaks, with commercials, and people were so taken by the actual story and caught up in it and believing it that they ignored the commercials, not thinking through that if the Martians were burning down New Jersey and other parts of the planet, that commercials would probably not be playing. And again, the acceleration of time. It's worth listening to now. It really is something. And the reason it took place in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, Fast, based on instructions from Wells, wanted an Anytown, USA. And he had a big map of the United States in his study. And he basically went, wonderful backstory. But I have to tell you, again, as somebody with a background in art and design, this is a gorgeous book as well as an informative book. And, it's understanding that your professional life has been in the advertising trade where imagery is crucially important and where things go. And every aspect of the visual experience is just as important as the copy. It is such a beautifully laid out book. I can give people just a sense of it's so graphic rich and it's so sophisticated. It just, you're reading the narrative and it's a great telling of all of these things about Mars, but then you get to another great graphic and it propels you through. It's just a beautiful book. And for anybody, with a UFO interest primarily who's watching this show, this is a good adjunctive book to have in your library. I'm looking forward to reading all your books, as you know, but I can't say enough about this one. And again, the subtitle here is The Big Book of Mars, From Ancient Egypt to the Martian, a deep space dive into our obsession with the red planet. And that it is. Did you come upon any factual material in your research that completely caught you off guard, or that you thought, even for this wild subject of our most intriguing planet?
There's so many surprising stories. I mean, I already mentioned the Viking story about finding positive results for life on Mars, which was like amazing to me. Spinning off of the War of the Worlds, I had never heard of the fact that it happened a second time, which I love. I told the story about that. It happened in 11 years later in Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador. Some radio host decided to do the same thing, but they didn't even bother saying it was a dramatization. And 15 people ended up dying in like the
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's crazy. So like, whoa, this happened again after the first time. So like, I thought that was a great story. I love all the early 20th century stories, spinning off of Lowell in the canals. So
yes,
one of my
everybody
favorites.
took that so seriously. And again, we didn't have telescopes with high resolution to, it looked like that. And why not?
He had great conviction in his theories. There was another professor from Amherst named Professor David Todd, who wanted to ascend 50,000 feet in a hot air balloon to receive signals from Mars. He thought this way, there's no interference to worry about, and we can more smoothly exchange messages.
50,000, 50?
50,000, yeah. And so no balloon had gone that high at that point.
No.
And he was doing tests, and I think at one point he took a test 5,000 feet. This was 1909, and it obviously didn't work out. He tried it again in 1920, and again it didn't work out. Like, he never got to take the trip. Not that he tried it and failed, but he never got to try it. But all these plans and all the headlines. I mean, I have a lot of the headlines in the book, which I love reproducing, because it's one thing to say it, but when you see this was the newspaper headline, this is what it said. It's really amazing. So I just loved finding those things. That one that you're showing, that was a hoax story. But if you read the story, and you can actually read that page, I mean, you're just seeing how they were capitalizing on the craze about, the Martian mania that was going on. and this whole story about Mars being a vegetable with an eyeball that overlooks the whole thing. And it's written like very seriously. That's the one with the hot air balloon. So you see the little graphic there.
Yep.
I really
Again,
enjoyed those kinds of stories.
Wonderfully laid out. It's just so much
Yeah.
fun to see at the same time as, you're reading this novel. Also, I think to be a good storyteller and get your readers caught up in your enthusiasm, which is happening in the moment. You're researching a project, and there's something about that level of creative nonfiction writing where, as you get more and more drawn in, your desire as a writer is to have your readers follow you, that this is not going to be some dry examination of some, dead historical stuff. This is a journey, and one with some roller coaster loops through it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, these are all they're stories that I find so exciting and fascinating. I wanted to share those stories, so all my enthusiasm is behind everything going into these books, like, can you believe this? I mean, that's kind of like the emotion behind it, I mean, it gets into very current stuff with Mars as well. I mean, I was able to go see the Mars Perseverance rover when it was still a JPL being built, and talking about its plans and future plans and challenges to overcome for colonizing Mars. Can we ever have a colony on Mars? Because the whole idea of reproduction is a huge question that no one's talks about really. But how does gravity affect us? We don't know. That's the one constant on Earth that has not changed over the course of humanity. Gravity has always been one. So
a
lot of interesting questions to explore.
Before we go on to your most recent book on ghosts, let's quickly take a look at some of the material that you sent along here.
Yeah, so this was for Bazaar magazine.
Yes.
That's Vivian Wheeler. So I met her when I did American Sideshow. She's in my Sideshow book. And then when I was writing for AOL News, I helped her. That's her son who's behind her.
Yes.
And he had been taken from her when he was about 3 years old.
Oh.
So he was missing for 30 years. He contacted me.
Because she was considered
No, her husband just stole him.
Oh, God.
And then he was put in foster care and grew up, with a foster family and was eventually adopted. So he wrote to me, like, I guess that was 2009, something like that. And he said, hey, I've been trying to find out who my mother is, and I've been told that it's Vivian Wheeler and that she has hypertrichosis called werewolf syndrome. And he said, can you help me find her? And he would reach out to other people in the Sideshow community. And I think a lot of people thought that he wasn't for real. But I believed him because I knew she did have a son, and I didn't know why someone would make up a story like that. She didn't have any money to be taken. He had also reached out to another friend of mine, George the Giant, who actually lives in the same town that Vivian did at the time in California. So he ran into her at the park coincidentally and said, hey, I was talking to Mark, and we both heard from someone who says he's your son. So we helped connect them, and they reunited, and I wrote about for AOL and for Bazaar, as you just saw, and we went on the Maury Povich show together as well to prove she was the mother.
Now
that's the world's first sword swallowing pregnant woman. Thrill killed Jill. Yep.
Do we know that her child was born in one piece?
Yes, he's fine. She's had 2 others since as well. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the first ever.
This is another one of those things, like the human blockhead, hammering a nail into your head through your nose and swallowing a sword. Obviously it's not sharp as a razor. At the same time, the mind boggles if this is not something that you do. Why exactly, how does this work? And if you do it wrong, do you die, or did you learn?
It's definitely dangerous. Definitely a dangerous stunt.
Yes.
But it's understanding your body, and obviously it takes training. And it can be dangerous. If people have been known to have cuts, and that can hospitalize you for sure. And people have died. But she's a pro, and she knew what she was doing.
This gentleman.
We didn't talk too much about Robert Wadlow, but I had the thrill of meeting, not Wadlow, of course, because he passed away in the 40s, but this is Sultan Kosin, the world's current tallest man, who's, I think, 8'3". He was 8'1" there. And I got to meet him while I was working for AOL News, so that was pretty exciting.
Boy.
He's a lot bigger than me. I'm 5'10", by the way, just for a little context.
And a more vintage photograph.
Yeah. 8'11"
Again,
and a half.
I guess, for some people, it's just, God, that how tall that person is, or, with quote unquote General Tom Thumb, one of Barnum's most popular sideshow participants. Just, gee, how short. And again, thinking of the lives these people live and how important their culture is to them together. Again, many of these folks spend their professional lives, traveling or together, as, you had discussed before. This is another thing. That's a real nail. That's a real nose. That's a real person. And I know that the mantra here should be, don't try this at home, kids. But is there any, you just follow the opening or create
we all
one?
have a hole right in the back here. Goes right into a cavity. Don't try this at home, by the way. But there is a cavity back here that's empty. Melvin was a boxer in the 1920s and had not done so well and had a bunch of bones like beaten up in his face. So he had some bones removed. So he had a bigger hole than most. So he could do that giant nail.
I am just dumbstruck. Moving on here, and we are amazingly coming in toward the end of our time together. There's another sword swallower.
Yeah, that's Johnny Fox from the Freakatorium we talked about.
Very colorful.
Yep, that was another bizarre article, just one page of it, but it was great to be able to write about Ripley.
Yeah, that classic Ripley text, that top line, that lettering said it all. And here he is. And briefly, can you tell us a little bit about your most recent book, Chasing Ghosts?
Yeah, so Chasing Ghosts gets into just, again, sort of a history of humanity's obsession with ghosts and curiosity about the afterlife and, what happens when we die. So it goes through ancient cultures and then gets into Victorian spiritualism when millions of people believe that we could talk to the dead and we could communicate, and talks about how the mediums did these different manifestations. And then it gets into, how science tackles the afterlife and how science has been used to either find evidence of ghost or can show how things that appear to be paranormal are actually just explained by science. So it gets into a ton of material.
Yeah. To sum it up, because we are coming into the last minute here, did your beliefs or opinions change from whatever they were before you started this book, by the time you finished it, about the phenomena of ghosts?
That's a good question. I went into the book open-minded, and I think I came out of it a little bit more open-minded.
Okay.
And I don't make judgments. I try to present material. Here's what people are saying here. Here's proof of this. Here's proof of that. Let the readers kind of come to a conclusion. Who am I to say if there's ghosts or not? None of us can. Anyone who says they are is lying.
Yeah.
None of us know.
I can't thank you enough for your time tonight. I'll look forward to us getting together in a month or so, and I'm honored to be supplying some of the background material for your upcoming book.
Thank you.
Do take care, and we will be in touch. This is Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA, Digital Broadcasting, with me, Peter Robbins. My special guest tonight has been Marc Hartzman. His website is, you can go to Marc Hartzman Books, but weirdhistorian.com. Next week's guest is internationally recognized research scientist Dr. Robert Davis, a professor for the State University of New York for over 30 years, lecturer at Harvard, Cambridge, Peking University, and author of The UFO Phenomena, Should I Believe?, Life After Death, An Analysis of the Evidence, and Unseen Forces, The Integration of Science, Reality, and You, among other things. If you've enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.